Every 10 ranks in Primus, your progress is going to stop. No matter how many more expeditions or arenas you fight in, your Ludus will not rank up any further until you fight the bosses for each interval. These are the Gatekeepers. The main goal in Primus is to take your Gladiator School from rank 100 all the way to rank 1. I didn't really want that climb to feel like one long, steady progression where the numbers simply kept increasing. So at certain ranks, at rank 90, 80, 70, and so on, you'll encounter a specific boss fight. To progress any further, you'll need to defeat them. I already had 2 gatekeepers built for the demo, but this week I focused on expanding that into the full system. That meant creating the logic, producing the artwork, and most importantly, finding a reason for each gatekeeper to exist beyond simply having more health and dealing more damage. The final part was much harder than I expected. Making a stronger enemy is easy enough, making a series of enemies that each force the player to think differently is not. I spent a lot of time brainstorming mechanics with AI, rejecting ideas, and trying to give every fight its own clear gimmick. One of the best examples could be Varro the Beastmaster. Varro fights along 2 other hounds, and his gimmick, I guess if you could call it, gives the ability for him to empower but also to some level control his hounds, where he can mark an enemy of choice and the hounds either side of him must attack that enemy for a certain period of time. This can become quite problematic for the player because ideally you want to spread out damage evenly or somewhat evenly across your team, but with that in place, it makes life a little bit harder. So the fight creates a clear problem for the player. You can protect the marked gladiator and try and keep them alive, or you can use the provoke effects to draw the hounds away and override Varro's command. The important thing is that you can't just bring your usual team into the fight and expect it to simply work exactly as it always has. You need to have an answer to what Varro is doing and every other gatekeeper. And that's pretty much the basic, pretty much standard for the rest of the gatekeepers. Each one should present a problem, and the player should be able to build a team around it. Another fight is the Brothers of the Net. These are 2 Retiarius gladiators that work together but have different roles to play. One focuses on applying buffs and debuffs, while the other focuses on dealing increased damage to anyone already affected by those debuffs. Individually, the idea isn't particularly complicated, but together they create a fight where allowing too many effects to build up can become extremely dangerous. You might need to remove debuffs, disrupt the support, Retiarius, or eliminate one of them before the combination becomes a bit too overwhelming. I've also been working on fights involving things like the war elephant, where the threat and the way you respond to it will be completely different again. And so by the end of this week, most of the gatekeepers are pretty much sorted. I've made pretty much all of their combat stance images from things such as the static stance, taking damage and dealing damage, as well as giving them all 4 abilities each for them to use, that being things from single hits to attacking everyone and applying buffs, debuffs, etc. From things such as giving them all a passive ability, which obviously can trigger depending on different events. It could be at the start of combat, it could be when this certain thing happens, but it all keeps things pretty unique. And I am still working on the visual representation of the player being able to see that, but overall, it feels like it's in a pretty good place. There are a few smaller presentation problems to fix. At the moment, Varro uses his normal spear animation for most attacks, which is fine, but it makes much less sense when the ability is supposed to involve a whip. And so what I do need to do is I do need to go through each of the gatekeepers and ensure that I give them at least a few almost ability-specific combat animations, just so that it does make sense as well. The same applies to sound effects. Right now, most of the attacks use the standard impact and damage effects, but a whip attack should have a whip crack. And the same goes for, for example, if there's a big animal charging or attacking, it shouldn't just sound like the normal sound effect. Now, those details don't change the underlying mechanic, but they can obviously make all of the characters in the game, whether that be gatekeepers or animals or bandits, a lot better and feel a lot more immersive as well. So there's some remaining work, along with obviously properly testing every fight and making sure each boss is feeling difficult enough, but we're still getting through that. Now, gatekeepers were pretty much the top priority on my list this week on my Trello board in terms of things to do. And with the ambitious deadline of getting Primus out by mid-August, it really is looking at all of the ideas I have and categorizing them into must-haves and nice-to-haves, and just basically going from there. And obviously the gladiators were the must-have, so that's what we were obviously working on this week. And I think likelihood is moving forward with next week, it will be looking at things such as ability sound effects, fixing up the remainder of the gatekeepers, and figuring out what the next best thing to do is. Now, whether we end up actually being able to hit the ambitious deadline of mid-August or whether we delay it a few weeks, I'm not really that fast, and I'm willing to delay something that I'm obviously not happy with. But that also means I need to keep saying no to features that aren't essential. For now, the next major step is really just testing the gatekeepers as complete fights and obviously making sure that everything looks and feels as it should. But that's everything for this week. If you are interested or curious in Primus, feel free to give it a wish list and that would go a long way. And if you haven't seen some of my previous videos for Primus, you can obviously go and check that out. With that said, that's the update for this week, and I'll catch you next week.